Cyphers. We used to be called sorcerers, a rare breed of being that could wield mind-controlling powers. In reality, we could control electrical impulses, but we didn't come into our own until the first real computers were invented. Then we became tech gods. While we are still at an advantage to most, even those days are past now. Now, we're a curiosity in a world where tech bridges all the gaps and has mostly replaced magic. My name's Ulf Whitlock. I'm one of a small number of people who has inherited the powers of the Cyphers. I'm also a hunter. I track down criminals for the government and that juicy paycheck. I even have my own badge. I take on all types: orcs, elves, goblins. Shoot first, ask questions maybe. That's how Dad did it, it's how his dad did it, and I'm one for tradition. Welcome to the world of cybernetics and the punk, to my world of magic, blood, sweat and steel. Welcome to the Cyphers Edge. This was not good, on so many levels. Despite the dark, through my other sight, I could see humanoid shapes crawling like spiders across the ceiling, down the many chains that suspended the dancers' cages. There was no sound as they descended, silent hunters stalking their prey. A scream cut through the confused chatter. My head whipped around and I saw an elf girl crying out as she stood staring at the ceiling. "Vampires!" More people, elves mostly, looked up to see the same thing. Only those with optic upgrades or natural night vision could see the horror descending on them. It was enough. Pandemonium erupted in the club. The crowd flew into a mixture of those desperately trying to find a way out and those with an instinct to attack. Multiple people drew weapons, hidden guns were extracted, ballistic augmentations were activated. None of it was going to do any ounce of good. I reached over the bar and grabbed Thea's arm. She was looking rather more composed than I would have expected. "Get Jasper, we need to get these people out of here." She nodded and ran for the big orc. I reached down into my hidden leg holster and drew my gun. A lot of good it would do me. What I really needed was a blade. I hadn't thought to bring my sword, why would I? Looking to Thea, I saw her sitting frozen on her stool, her eyes tracking the vampires high above. A slight lengthening of her ears, a snarl building on her lips. I had to get her somewhere safe. If she changed here, the vamps would only be the start of our problems. "Thea!" I yelled as I shook her. She showed no signs of registering me. I shook her again. It was no good. Some part of her mind was in hunter mode, other parts pushing back, leaving her stalled in indecision. More screams started to ring out as the attackers fell like rain around us. They dropped on their prey indiscriminately, mouths wide, teeth bared. I could see victims lashing out, weapons, blades, and bullets, hardly even slowing the bloodsuckers down. They were fast, but not as fast as the three that I had faced. Vampires had their abilities heightened by having underlings. These ones must have been at the bottom of the pile. They were above average by a good margin, but they weren't superhuman. They weren't on the same level as Varish. They were also not thinking clearly. They were feverishly hungry, and that meant their minds were foggy and unfocused. You could tell from how they were moving through the crowd, how they fed. Without their master and the red mist descended, they were just animals now. Worse than animals. Animals killed to feed. These were killing for the pleasure of it. They were reveling in the bloodshed and the fear. Keeping my cool, that was the key. Think clearly. I scanned the chaos around me with my other sight and picked out about 6 targets that had enough body augmentations to make them vulnerable. It took precious seconds to hack as many as I could. I wasn't going to waste time breaking down firewalls. I uploaded the burn programs across the board. Primal cries of pain ripped through the club. It was proof that if I couldn't kill them, I could at least hurt them and slow them down. Another target presented itself. I locked on and set their head on fire, combusting their cranial implants with a burn virus. Maybe that one would stay dead. I shook Thea by the shoulder. "Thea, snap out of it." She blinked, looked at me like waking from a dream. I looked into her eyes. The blue of her irises were yellow at the edges. Hair had sprouted high on her cheekbones. Her teeth were shifting into a more canine shape. "You need to hold on." She nodded, fear plain on her face. It wasn't fear for herself. She was stuck in a building with hundreds of people and the smell of blood. I knew what she was afraid of. "I'm going to get you out. Don't worry." I looked around the room. Where was Jasper? Why weren't the doors opened? One of the vampires locked eyes with me and snarled. It leapt from a standing position to grab onto a cage above us and flung itself in my direction. I raised my pistol and took 2 shots as it flew through the air. One went through its throat, the other through its head. It hit the ground in front of me, the creature convulsing as blood poured from its wounds. Out of action for the moment. Fear and I backed up, my gun tracing every possible target. Someone was calling out my name. I looked behind me, my gun trained on the vamp on the floor, just in case. Jasper was pushing through the crowd. Movement from above him in the shadows. "Watch out!" I called out too late. One of the vampires dropped onto Jasper's shoulders. It opened its maw wide and leant in to sink its teeth into his wide neck. But Jasper was fast. You didn't get to his place in the boxing scene if you weren't. With one hand, he reached up and grabbed his attacker by the neck like a dog. The other chrome-plated fist slammed into its mouth. He ripped it from his shoulders, blood flying from the wounds around his neck where its claws had dug in. Like a rag doll, he threw it against the bar and punched it twice more in the face. The limp body dropped to the ground, face a wreck of blood and broken bones, unconscious. He breathed in deep. "Cheeky fucker!" Orcs were immune to the vampiric virus, but it didn't mean they couldn't be bled dry. "Are you okay?" I asked, heart pounding. He nodded. "Yeah." His clothes were torn and stained with blood. He'd lost his sunglasses. He had no weapons, but he'd managed to find an LED lantern somewhere. It hung from his belt, a sphere of white light illuminating the horror immediately around us. "Shit!" Fear spun me around. She'd been watching the one I'd put down earlier. The wound in its neck and head had begun to close over. Blood on the floor around it was even being sucked back into the wound as it got smaller. I hadn't seen a vampire put itself together before. This was not the situation I wanted to be in to witness it for the first time. I shot it through the head again, and it slumped back to the floor. I could keep going like this, but eventually I was going to run out of ammo. Even as I thought it, I could hear other firearms click on empty chambers as the defenders were now running into the same problem. We could sink as much lead as we wanted into them, it wasn't going to make a difference. They would just get back up again. Sure, some might have a blade or two, but it was going to do us no good if we couldn't catch them. Jasper grabbed me, bringing my focus back to him. "We're locked in," he said, doing a great job of staying calm. Well, more calm than most. "The fuck? How?" His eyes darted around the room as he spoke. "They've overridden the safety protocols. We're in full lockdown. I can't even get a signal to the outside world." The key fact about vampires, even the feral ones, was they used to be normal people. When they weren't in a killing fever, they still possessed the same abilities and intelligence they had always had. One of them must have been a hacker, a damn good one. "We need to open this place up." "There's a manual reboot and overrides back there." Jasper jerked his thumb over his shoulder to the hallway that led to Shaky's office. "Let's hope he's working on it." A vampire rushed us from the crowd. Jasper reacted before I did. A punch like a cannonball sunk itself into the creature's gut and it doubled over. I raised my weapon and unloaded 2 rounds into its forehead. The boxer gripped the vampire by the head in one arm and began to pull. I knew what he was trying to do. I knew what was going to happen too. The head stayed attached and the arm tore free as Jasper spread his arms wide. A natural evolution of vampires was reinforced spinal columns and neck muscles. This meant that trying to behead one with brute force was incredibly difficult. Jasper swore and threw the arm at the ground, then tossed the rest of the body aside. "Motherfucker!" "We can't do this all night," Fear said. "God's damn it!" I followed Jasper's gaze to the bar. The one the boxer had laid out first began to move again. Its jaw clicked back into place. Its face reformed. The eyes blinked and it tried to stand. Jasper grabbed it by its grubby hair and spun it around, hammering its face into the brass rail that encircled the bar. "Stay the fuck down!" He emphasized every word with a strike to the solid metal rail. The sound of flesh and bone being smashed together was sickening. Its head looked destroyed. I knew it wouldn't be enough. My punch dagger slid free of my wrist as my hand split in two. I took a swing at its neck. It took a few hard strikes as I hacked away. My blade was made for jabs and stabbing, not slicing up body parts. Jasper was still holding the head while the body slid off the bar and collapsed to the floor. The dark red, almost black blood poured from its neck. He tossed it away. "One down," he said with no real hope in his voice. More screaming, less gunfire. It was, of course, getting worse. "Is there nowhere else to go?" "There's the private rooms." The reply was Thea. She emerged from the crowd. Blood splattered her clothes. She had a lantern hanging from one hand, the other held a shotgun. I guessed that it was the one they kept under the bar for peacekeeping. I'd been in those rooms. There was probably enough room to jam everyone in and close the doors and hope they were thick enough. Right, you and Jasper get as many people as you can and find a way to jam the doors. Thea nodded. Right. She ripped out an empty magazine from the shoddy and pulled a spare one from the waistband of her shorts. What are you gonna do? I did my best to sound confident. Create a distraction. Good luck. Jasper waded into the crowd, calling out to try and get everyone's attention. Thea made to follow, then turned back to us. Thea, come on, she said, grabbing her arm. Thea pulled away. I can't. I need to stay here. But, Thea objected. Thea shook her head, hands up, partially covering her face. I can do more help if I stay here, trust me. Thea frowned but wasn't going to push it given the circumstances. She disappeared into the press of people. In my other sight, I could see Thea's panic in her body. Her brain was firing off impulses, her nervous system going crazy as she tried to push back the change. I knew exactly what was going through her head right now. I was surprised she had held it together this long. Just hold on a little bit longer, sis. Don't let it get you, I said, pushing her to the back of the bar and putting her between me and the door that led to the hallway. Oh, really? I was gonna wolf out, but now you've said that, she retorted sarcastically. You're not helping. I looked over my shoulder for an escape route. The door behind us was of course sealed shut. I could only imagine what was going through Shaggy's head right now. The little gremlin must have been losing his shit. There was no point trying to hack the door and open it up. The power was cut. With no power, I was out of tricks. But if they'd been following my scent here, then I was the primary target. I could use it to my advantage. I watched as the bar staff and Jasper did their best to fight off the feral bloodsuckers. There was only one thing left for me to do. I climbed onto the bar, fired 2 rounds into the dark above me. Okay, I know why you're all really here. All the glowing red eyes turned to face me. Come and get me. Every vampire froze as their gaze fixed on me. Me standing alone on the bar, gun raised in defiance. Yeah, that's right. Breathe in deep, smell that? Thea and Jasper worked fast, taking full advantage of the lull in the battle, the partygoers who were still alive being funneled into the private rooms. I know you recognize my scent. It was all over your sire, wasn't it? They snarled, teeth bared, claws extended. Ulf, Thea said coolly. What's your plan? I didn't take my eyes off the pack as it slowly began to close in on us. Plan? Ulf? I looked back to her. She had lifted a hand to the base of her neck, to the only spot where there was any cybernetics in her body. She pressed a finger to the spot and spoke calmly. I took my eyes off her, watching the vampires, but I could hear her voice just above a whisper. Releasing restrictions. Authority code Alpha Delta 225. No. I dared another glance back. Her eyes were completely yellow now, her face starting to elongate, her shoulders widening. It's okay, she said, her voice shifting pitch as her throat changed. You get gone. I've got this. 2 or 3 vampires, and I would have happily left her to her own devices. 4 or 5, and I would risk it. But there was still 9 standing bloodsuckers, closing in, feral, blood up. A cry of pain from behind me that turned into a howl. I risked one last look. She had thrown her vest aside, her jeans were discarded. Her body writhed and twisted as it morphed into a new shape. Short brown fur covered her. The lean muscles that she had swelled into more primal, bulky shapes. Her figure grew in stature and her face elongated into a canine snout. I spun back to the horde in time to see 2 of them lunge towards me. My last chance. The only thing I could do before coming vampire chow, I activated the Hermes. I could only activate it a couple of times a day. The forces it put on my body were too extreme to use it too often. The vampires all but froze in midair. I ran between them, firing the last of my shots through their temples as I dashed past, hoping to buy fear some more time. The doors to the private rooms that were now jam-packed with people stood open for me. I took a longer route there than I should, slashing necks with my blade, giving fear every advantage I could. I pushed out the Hermes. The strain it was putting in my body began to come through as I ran it past its recommended limit. I had to just get a little bit closer. I jumped over dead bodies and broken tables and chairs, trying not to slip in the pools of blood. Only a few more meters and I was safe. I hit the limit. The safety shut-off function kicked in and time caught up to me. I felt the temporal whiplash, my body jolted and I fell forward, skidding on blood, tumbling only steps from the open door. Thea held the frame in one hand, the door in the other. I looked up. She was stunned to see me there all of a sudden, sprawled in the blood and junk. Her eyes left me and looked to the vampires, now disorientated, their prey vanished. Fear? The howl cut through the silence. All the vampires froze. A growl permeated the dark. Get in, I cried, scrabbling to my feet. I stumbled to the door and pushed her aside. Close the door, now! She stared at me for the longest seconds in my life. The bar was now the most dangerous place in the city, and she was holding the door wide open. A scream, then another. The sound of bodies being rendered, the tearing of flesh. Another howl. A body flew through the dark and slammed into the door. Thea looked down, her face pale as she took in the deep gashes across the chest and the bloody stump where her head should be. I pulled her inside and threw my weight against the door. It shut, blocking out the sight that I didn't want anyone to see. But the sound of the fighting, the slaughter, continued to permeate the barrier. Memories flooded my mind, memories of another night my sister, my favourite person in the world, had lost control. The night our family had fractured, the night we had lost the one person who had kept us united and always stood up for fear. After that, it was just her and me. Just us against the world. The sounds of slaughter had me mesmerized, but a voice pulled me back from the past. What was that? What? It was Thea whispering in the dark. What's out there? Our only chance of getting out of here alive. Fear? Even as she said her name, I could tell she knew. She just didn't want it to be true. Vampires were bad, but they were generally respected if they weren't feral. But if someone found out you were a werewolf, it was pretty universal prejudice. Right now, I didn't care what Thea knew. I could only hope that Fear was going to survive and regain control enough that we could all get out of here alive. How well can we jam the door? Thea shrugged. It's a maglock, so best we can do is put our weight behind it. Start moving furniture then. I helped grab the wide padded chairs and the smooth steel table, piling them against the door. A few big orcs put their weight behind it as we all piled up and hunkered down, the sounds of the fight starting to fade. Who's the dog? One orc said, pushing hard into the pile. I glanced at Thea, then back at the orc. They're the ones saving your ass, I whispered, my voice like stone. I couldn't hear any more fighting. It had gone silent in the bar beyond. I blinked and looked into my other sight. Only one live figure remained in the bar. A ghostly, large, muscular creature stalked through the dark room, occasionally down on all fours, occasionally on its hind legs. One of the bodies on the floor began to flinch and regain some semblance of life. A vampire with its head still attached, putting itself back together. The brutish shape leapt across the room, clearing several meters at once. It landed on its victim and tore at its neck, ripping away again and again. I looked away. Fia hadn't paid any attention to the doors to the private rooms. There was enough blood and meat in the bar to keep her busy. Everyone was very sensibly staying remarkably quiet. Then the sound of the mag locks on the doors engaged like drums in the silence, and barely seconds later, Fia attacked the doors. The sound had drawn her attention. She began to lash out at the steel plating. I was pretty sure, that they were as strong as the door back in our apartment. I prayed I was right. It shook under her barrage, and the screech of steel was heard as her claws rendered the metal on the outside layer. Some of the survivors screamed and whimpered. I was right. The door stood its ground, and the attack moved from our door to the one next along as she got bored and noticed the smells for more potential food beyond the walls. My comm started to ring. It was shaky. I breathed a sigh of relief. He was alive and well. I answered it, my voice low. Brass Knuckles Slaughterhouse, how may I direct your call? It was the wrong time to be sassy. Why the fuck is your sister prowling around my bar? It looks like Dawn of the Dead in there. She just put down a tribe of vampires that were tearing your club apart. A little gratitude will be appreciated. He didn't respond as angry as before. Really? Check with your staff. A bunch of feral bloodsuckers crashed the joint. Put us in lockdown. The only reason we're not getting drained right now is on the other side of these very thick doors. Well, I can fucking see that. He still sounded pissed, understandably. So what was your plan to deal with her once she'd finished with them? I paused, trying to think of something. That's what I thought. The line went dead. I tried to reconnect, but he didn't answer. Thea looked at me, eyes wide, expectant. "Well?" she asked. "He's upset." "Why am I not surprised?" I tried looking through my other side of the bar, but with the power back on, the wall in front of me was full of electronics, screens on the other side, cables and speakers of all sorts. I couldn't make anything out clearly. "What's he doing?" I shrugged. "Calling for help?" "So, we just sit here then?" she asked tersely. "He's your boss," I shot back. We waited for what felt like forever. The smell of blood, sweat, and gunpowder were not good companions in a room this crowded. I don't know what I was expecting. I just hoped the injured would survive the next however long we were going to be in here. Eventually, Shaky's call came through. "You can come out now." It cut off without waiting for a reply. Weary, nervous, we removed the furniture from the door and unlocked it. Only Thea and I emerged at first. The bar, or what was left behind, was a no man's land. Bodies littered the place. Blood splattered the walls and floor, the bar, even some of it getting as high as the ceiling. Arms, legs, intestines, other body parts were thrown about. I looked down to see a head, the vampire that had first attacked me, its face torn to bloody ribbons, its skull crushed. Grey matter had been torn from the hole. Behind me, someone threw up. In the center of it all, hunched over and sitting on the floor, a blanket over her shoulders, was Thea. She was covered in cuts. It looked like one of her eyes had been slashed across with a set of claws. Her hair was matted with drying blood and gore. She was shivering. Standing next to her, in an almost completely clean suit with his hands on her shoulders, was Shaky. I had no idea if he had come in here after she'd changed back, or by some miracle, he had calmed her down. I rushed over to her, dropping to my knees and holding her close. "Are you okay?" I wiped the blood from her face and looked into her damaged eye.
"She's okay,"
Shaky said,
"but I think she's gonna need a shower and a good night's sleep."
I looked from him to her. Thea looked dazed. Shaky looked untouched. "Did you calm her down?" He shrugged.
"Kind of. It's a goblin trick. Doesn't always work."
I shook my head, amazed. No one I'd ever seen try and calm a werewolf down before had escaped without at least a few marks to show for it. Thea regained herself and looked up at me, then smiled weakly. "I think we stayed out a bit late." The club emptied as we sat there.
"I'll wait until you're gone before I call this in,"
Shaky said softly. "Thanks." I got to my feet and left Thea to compose herself as I retrieved her vest and jeans from behind the bar. I found the garments, surprisingly not soaked or damaged, then returned to Thea. I held up the blanket as she made herself somewhat decent. Just as we were about to leave, the double doors swung open and a police sweeper team moved in. Dressed head to toe in TAC Ops gear, ballistic helmets and guns at the ready. We'd left it too late. One of the survivors must have called it in as soon as they got signal. Our escape was cut off. I could see the future unfolding ahead of us. Thea wasn't going to walk out of here free tonight. A law that came with being a registered Lycan was that you weren't allowed to change shape intentionally, especially if you were above a certain threat level. Thea was definitely in that category, and it didn't take the team leader long to identify her. Despite all she had done to put down the real threat, despite her willingness to cooperate, I was forced to stand aside and watch her be cuffed and loaded into the back of an armored truck. We couldn't even argue that it had been unintentional. She'd used the manual override. It was recorded in her suppression programs. She didn't even resist. She just let them handle her like some kind of animal. I could see Shaky arguing the point with the team leader, a swarthy human male. It wasn't getting him anywhere. "This is bullshit," I said, marching over and interrupting the argument. The team leader tried to stare me down, but I wasn't having any of it. "You can pack that condescending look back up, or I'll fry those pretty little optics of yours so bad you won't ever see again." He rested his hand on the pistol in his holster and I saw the tension in his jaw. I had already used my Hermes unit twice today, but to put this guy in his ass, I'd risk a third try.
"You try it, and I won't hesitate to put you down, Hunter."
He practically spat the last word. Shaky threw his hands up and pushed me back a step.
"You two want to kill each other? Do it outside. I've had enough of that in here tonight."
He looked from me to the officer, then back to me.
Or we could think clearly and just let him do his job.
I ground my teeth, biting back words. I wanted to spit in the man's face, but Shaky was right. The guy was a wanker, probably, but he was just doing his job. No matter how much I hated it, it was the law. I leveled a finger at him. She so much gets one finger laid on her, you're the one who I'm going to come for to balance the debt with. He turned away and strode from the building. I kicked a disembodied head and sent it flying over the bar. Fuck! Shaky rolled his eyes.
You want to calm the fuck down?
They wouldn't even let me talk to her.
Yeah, well, picking a fight with that asshole wasn't exactly gonna get you anywhere.
What do you suggest I do then? I shot back. He shrugged.
Wait. See what the fallout is. In the meantime, get some sleep.
I wiped a hand over my face and sighed. I could feel the exhaustion kicking in. I'll call Les and Rio. There's got to be some options we can take. The goblin grabbed my arm and steered me to the door.
Get some sleep, Ulf.
We watched the truck pull away as I walked outside.
She'll be alright.
I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that they would see the exceptional circumstances and let her go. But I, of all people, knew how fucked up the law could be when the chips were stacked against you. Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. Script and narration by J.J. Brandis. Music was provided by Kayor McLeish. Copyright J.J. Brandis 2024.